Hello, welcome to Quackalope, and today we are covering
Monopoly.
Probably one of the biggest games we've ever covered on our channel.
And probably one of the biggest games ever.
Certainly one of the biggest games in the world. I mean, this has sold
250 million copies worldwide.
if we could get 1% of those to watch this video.
0.5.
Along with that, this has had how many different variations?
1,144.
1,144 variations of this classic game. In front of us right now, we have spread out the classic original 1935 edition of Monopoly. You can see the old components in the boxes here. In a moment, we will start diving into all of the different variations that we're covering in this video, because we're not just sticking to this.
And we're not doing 1,144, FYI.
No. We're going to be touching on the ones that have made integral changes to the core game and why and how those might be right for or wrong for you and your gaming group. That being said, at the very beginning, I'd like to go ahead and introduce who we are. We are Quackalope.
Yeah, hello.
Very nice to meet you. Our assumption is there's going to be a lot of people that watch this video, and this is the very first and only piece of Quackalope content you've seen. First off, thank you for being here.
Welcome.
Super glad you're here. Second off, if you're interested in the board gaming world, the space as a whole, maybe you are just interested in what we're talking about when it comes to Monopoly, maybe you grew up playing a game like this, there is such a deep and fascinating world and community of board gamers out there. That's what this channel is all about. Celebrating and playing and demoing and trying to introduce games to new people.
Board gaming is something wonderful, and if Monopoly ever spiked your curiosity, then we welcome you to stay for this video, because it's going to be pretty interesting.
Yeah, and not only stay for this video, but here's the thing I really wanted to lean into. Hit that subscribe button down below. Leave a comment letting us know what brought you to this space. Did you grow up playing Monopoly as a kid? Are you trying to find family games to reintroduce to kind of your friends or your network, bring the children home for the holidays? Or are you curious about kind of the wider space? Or maybe you're already a fan of Quackalope. Maybe this is just a game that you have some mixed feelings about and you're interested to see how we cover it. Either way, leave a comment down below letting us know where your introduction to board gaming started. For me, it was right here.
Yeah.
Genuinely.
Life, Monopoly, Sorry, Connect 4.
All the games we've been covering over the course of today. The places where board gaming sort of started for us as kids at my grandparents' house. So I just want to reiterate, make sure you're subscribed to this channel. We'd love to be able to share with you and play games with you and just show off this space and this community that we love so much.
Yeah, there's so many things out there. There's so many different types of games and experiences. And we want to be those people that welcome you into it.
This format of Right For You, Wrong For You is designed around the concept of not every game being right for every game.
Not at all.
And that's kind of the reality of it. So as we break this down, remember that there's a mix of other videos underneath this same format that can show off games to you and help you find something to bring the family, bring the friends, or just play on your own if you're interested in tabling some things. There's great solo options as well.
Oh, for sure.
All that being said, that's enough harping. Hopefully you've still made it through to this point in the video, or skipped ahead. I mean, either way, I don't mind. Here's the thing, Right For You, Wrong For You. This is where we go through and we break down a game in 7 categories that we try to consider when deciding to add it to our gaming shelf. It's a hard decision to make. There's limited space. I have stacks of games adding up on my floor. So am I going to be keeping Monopoly?
Will you be keeping Monopoly? We'll find out very soon.
That's sort of the question. Those 7 categories we go through are going to be the overview to start with, the breakdown. And in that, because this is such a historical game, we're also going to dive into a little bit about the lore, the history, the structure of how this game came to be and where it is now. After that, we're going to talk about the theme, the thematic overtones, the stuff that, for me, sets the foundation of a game. From there, we're going to talk about accessibility. How easy is it to get to the table? How hard are the rules to learn? And how long will it take you to play? Then we're going to talk about the gameplay itself. Now, this won't be a how to play.
No, not at all.
Instead, we'll talk about the foundations and functions of playing the game, the things that, to us, strike an interesting note.
And some of the misconceptions around Monopoly, too.
That's another key, right? This has been around for so long. There's various ways that people play this game that aren't quite the most
No, not even
enjoyable.
close.
If we're going to be honest, they facilitate probably a poor play experience. We want
Yep.
to talk about those and make sure you know how to get into this game the appropriate way. After that, we're going to talk about modes of play. Where does it play best? How big should your gaming group be? How often should you get it to the table? Questions like that.
And that'll depend on the version you're playing with.
That's the other key. We're going to be diving into a mix of versions. Hold on for just a second, and we'll start touching on what those are going to be. Finally, we're going to talk about innovation. Where this game stands out. Where is it innovative? What does it do new, or what did it do new when it came to the market? So,
A lot to cover, folks.
a lot to cover. All that being said, let's go ahead and start cycling through the other things that we're covering. We're not just talking about the 1935 edition of Monopoly.
We're covering everything.
We're covering at least the top series of games that had a
Yep.
positive impact on the play experience itself, with a few notes here and there.
Everything we found interesting, right?
So, starting first, we're going to also talk about the introduction of brand new Monopoly. This is the 2020 version of this classic game. There isn't a lot that significantly changed. There's a few rules variations. There's even the introduction of some fan rules.
Yeah.
But then on top of that, it's going to be your meeples that really shift. Slide this over to the side.
Next we have Monopoly Mega Edition. What Mega Edition is doing is that it's bringing in a lot more content, and it's also facilitating a speedier game.
Yeah, Monopoly Mega Edition not only brings in new content and facilitates a faster game with the introduction of the Play
speed
Fast
die.
die, the speed die, but it also is, I think, 25% bigger.
Yeah.
Which in itself is an interesting mechanic or component of Monopoly. Slide that over to the side. The next thing we're going to be talking about, we're going to be talking about Monopoly, the Amazon exclusive edition, I believe, the longest game ever. So if you hate Monopoly, this is the game you should genuinely despise. This
And stay away from.
It designs Monopoly in a way that makes it almost unbeatable.
Probably with all those house rules that people love to implement.
Incredibly hard to go bankrupt, has 3 layers of cycles, only has
wow.
1 dice, so it's completely impossible to roll doubles. You only win the game when you own every land place in the map.
Oh my god, okay.
And it is literally impossible to go bankrupt because your dollar notes can be ripped in half so that you can continue playing.
Do you play once and you never get to play it again?
No, well, you can continue playing because they just become smaller, more proliferative versions of Monopoly. And on top of that, the core game of Monopoly does have a original rule that talks about banknotes. The bank is never limited. So if you run out of money, the bank can write down on a piece of paper however much money they want, and it stands at the same value as the money in the game itself.
Well, there we go. We're already learning.
So this just expands upon that core concept, right?
Well, next up, we have Monopoly Ultimate Banking, which introduces credit cards to the game.
Ultimate Banking is going to be a electronic version of the Monopoly game. So instead of doing all the paperwork, having a handful of money sitting over there on the side, every player is going to have a credit card that they slot into a credit card reader, and it automatically does all the transactions for you. So we're going to talk about how that mechanic works and whether or not that's something that makes it easier or more accessible for people to play who don't really want to sit down and do all of the math. After that, we're going to be swinging into Monopoly Gamer Edition. Now, we don't have all the Gamers Editions.
No, not at
Instead,
all.
we pulled the Mario Kart Edition for one specific reason. First off, I love Mario Kart, hence the Yoshi on my arm. Second off, after that, it's going to introduce mechanics like dropping bananas, dropping items upon the player mat itself, creating a little bit more of a head-to-head take-that dynamic when you're playing core Monopoly.
Yeah, and I think it actually changes up the base game a lot.
It does. It
which is
changes up the
interesting.
base game significantly.
Next we have Monopoly Cheaters Edition. So this one's interesting because it's actually incentivizing players to go in, try and steal money, try and do things you shouldn't be able to do, and try to not get caught. If you do get caught, there's this handy-dandy little handcuff to try and prove it.
This does some really cool things. First off, like you said, incentivizes the act of cheating in itself. The jail punishment is now structured around being caught by other players, and the community chest cards shift into a mechanic that leans into cheating massively, right? If you get access to them, there's a chance you're going to go way far ahead, but everyone's playing with those. After that, we're going to pull out Monopoly Junior. This is a younger style of Monopoly game with a fan-voted rubber duck introduced, which, of course, we had to bring onto the channel here. I'll leave this little guy right
Permanent
there.
staple, right?
I mean, more or less, right? It's the smallest duck I have. But Monopoly Junior is going to be my first Monopoly game, trying to bridge that audience, take it from this, which is very heady, very old school, onto something that your kids can sit down and play.
In a short amount of time as well.
Yep. And then finally,
This, I think, might be my favorite one.
we
Monopoly
have
Deadpool.
Monopoly Deadpool. Now, you might be asking, did Monopoly Deadpool drastically change the way the game plays? The answer
Not at all.
would be no. Instead, this is representing the nearly 1,000 other versions of Monopoly that change the properties, change the values, change the pawns themselves. One of the reasons this game has been so successful and so popular is the collector and IP popularity of it, right?
Oh, yeah, for sure.
Being able to add in different characters, play with your favorite heroes, collect your favorite sites. I mean, there's been Pokemon, there's been Nintendo, there's been Disney.
Let's face it, there's been everything.
There's small towns that have custom Monopoly games made of their own little city, street, and blocks.
It started with San Diego?
Yeah. So, Monopoly Deadpool is representing that entire lineup of games.
I love his little mustache, too.
Yeah, absolutely. So, that is what we're doing here. That's what we're talking about. That's the structure we're going through, covered with B-roll, covered with, beautiful visuals. We're not actually going to physically open every single one of these.
No, not at all.
Instead, I'll be showing you footage of them throughout the course of our conversation. So, we went through the games that we're kind of talking about on the periphery here. Let's go ahead and start diving into the core classic.
Monopoly itself. So, should we start with a little bit of an overview?
Start with the
history?
overview. Well, let's get an overview of how the game itself actually plays for any of you that aren't familiar. And I'll do so by reading the flavor text. I like flavor text.
If you don't know this about this channel, we love to read lore and stories.
Yeah, and here's the interesting thing. This is the original rulebook from the 1935 version of the game.
That's awesome.
So, brief idea of the game. The idea of the game is to buy and rent or sell properties so profitably that one becomes the wealthiest player and eventual monopolist. Starting from go, move tokens around the board according to throw of dice. When a player token lands on a space not already owned, he may buy it off the bank. Otherwise, it is auctioned to the highest bidder. The object of owning property is to collect rents from opponents stopping there. Rentals are greatly increased by the erection of houses and hotels, so it is wise to build them on some of your lots. To raise more money, lots may be mortgaged to the bank. Community chest and chance spaces give the draw of a card, instructions on which must be followed. Sometimes players land in jail. The game is one of shrewd and amusing trading and excitement.
Oh my god, there's so much about this that actually goes against the original intent of this game.
Yeah, which is fascinating. So, the idea of Monopoly. You're going to be using your meeples here, these iconic pieces. I mean, these tokens become a symbol of board gaming moving forward.
100%.
But you're going to use your player markers to move around the outside of this board using
These
a
dice.
set of dice. So you're going to roll the die in the game state, move the indicated amount of spaces, and then resolve the location you landed on. Either buying properties, like we can display here, that can be mortgaged, that can be owned, that can be upgraded to charge people more money when they land on them, or paying or collecting whatever item you land on, whether it's income tax, whether you're dealing with a chance card, potentially landing over here on the short line railroad, or landing on another player's railroad.
Yep.
Throughout the course of the game, your goal is to have a monopoly. That's the core structure. It's kind of how the game was originally designed when we get to the history. And the object of the game is to bankrupt your fellow players. Now, the idea, where did this game start?
So this was a game originally conceived by Lizzie Maggie. She created what was, in that time, called the Landlord's Game. And it wasn't supposed to be fun. It was actually an educational tool that was used to demonstrate the problem with concentrating land in private properties. In other words, she was going against taxation, capitalist taxation at the time. What happened was, after the game got a little bit of popularity, families started playing it a little bit, I'm sure they immediately started to misconstrue this as, oh, this is a game. No, it's a tool.
It's sort of fun to own all the property.
What happened is that a man by the name of Charles Darrow played this at someone else's house. And when they did, they got immediately enamored by the landlord's game. However, he decided to create his own version. And that version is the version that we know today as Monopoly. This got later picked up by Parker Brothers, and then from that point got picked up by others, and it's a very long history. In summation, this was originally as an educational tool. It got misconstrued into what it was trying to criticize, which I find deeply fascinating.
Well,
it's
and
just
has,
ironic
has
at
gone
best.
on to be one of the most successful games of all time. Easily, both because of its historical context, the fact that it was one of the first to the market, designed to enter the family living space and bring families together around the game table with a good old pair of dice. Right? It does have some leverage for being one of those first. But then also the iconic meeples, the iconic locations, the fact that you're touring and visiting, and there's still an educational component to this game. You're seeing cities and locations around the world. You're collecting and learning how to use money. And so the idea and core concepts of it being an educational game are not necessarily wrong. The application and the end message is different nowadays.
Well, to kind of like contrast what happened, Lizzie Maggie got paid only $500 when they discovered that the original game, the original concept came from her. So yeah, capitalist indeed.
It's certainly a fascinating tale and brings us to where we are today. I have a wide range of games here, starting with two of the Parker Brothers versions of the games. I have the Popular Edition and the classic Monopoly game with the Popular Edition board. These are going to be largely the same. Some of the differences are going to be the fact that originally, back in the day, wooden components would have been used instead of our meeples.
Fascinating.
You get up to the Popular Edition where you start introducing things like the battleship and the horse, and then finally you had another run that had my favorite iconic symbol, the thimble, which has actually been pulled out of the game recently. One thing I want to touch on, a comparison between some of our other games and this current version. This version is going to be largely the same game. Mostly the same locations that you're exploring, the same core functions of gameplay. However, the biggest difference is going to be the change in the iconic symbols. So instead of the spinning wheel,
The top hat,
the thimble,
and the iron.
you're going to be introducing things like the dog, the T-Rex, the top hat still maintained its position, but also a little rubber duck, a cat, a penguin, and a battleship.
And a T-Rex.
And a T-Rex, all of which were voted on by the community, right? The people playing Monopoly.
Yeah.
I was upset to see the thimble go,
Thimble is pretty cool.
but I made sure that I still had one of my own that I can always play with. So that's a little bit of a comparison. But what we have before us is going to be that classic Popular Edition of the Parker Brothers game. Even with the original US patent number down here, 1509, all the way to 2026.
And just in case you were doubting, 1936 right there. It's
1936.
pretty amazing.
Yeah, this is one of the originals. So that is a overview of the history and the structure of the game. If you're not familiar with Monopoly and you want a game that has been iconic in, you know, American lore and tradition,
It's pretty much in every single closet of every single person I've ever gone to their homes.
I'd say it
Crazy.
certainly exists in at least our parents' generation of closets. And on top of that, something that stretched far beyond the boundaries of the United States. How many languages has it been translated into?
Oh my god, 37 languages.
37 different languages, over 1,000 different types of game, and something like 250 million copies sold. If you want something that is worth experiencing if you're part of this space. A game designed around a little bit of dice rolling, a lot of player versus player negotiation, squabbling, selling, trading, buying, upgrading, trying to maintain control of this map. Over the course of a game where you're trying to drive your friends and family into desperate bankruptcy,
This
certainly might be right for you. Let's bridge from this over into the theme of the game.
Yeah.
Where does the theme stand out? And what's important to me in this part of the discussion is, how does the theme actually integrate into the gameplay itself?
Well, we're not going to take any stock in what Lizzie Maggie wanted the game to be, but
Sure.
Monopoly today is based on trying to be the strongest, literally landlord you can be,
Sure.
to try and take everybody else out of the competition, and you to be the richest person by the end of that game.
Yeah, and I think it does the theme very well. I mean, oftentimes when I describe this game to people, I say, Monopoly is a game where one person is having the most fun.
Yeah.
If we're playing with a family of 5, the reason I'm willing to play Monopoly again, if I am, is oftentimes because the idea of being the person who's driven everyone else into bankruptcy does feel good. And on top of that, one of the core mechanics, a psychological part of this game, is going to be the introduction of chance itself.
Yeah.
There's a weird psychological trait in the human being or the human species where even if you give someone an advantage in a game, and they begin and continue to win because of the advantage. Like, for instance, if I gave you $1,000 more at the start of a game and you won, you would feel victorious in your win. You'd feel good in your win despite the fact that you were given an advantage. And in fact, you psychologically would feel like you had earned and owned that win along with that advantage. There is a balance of that here. There is randomness in the game. There is a mix of where you land determines what you can buy, how resources are spent, and certainly determines who might end up being the winner. However, there is also an element of strategy. Let's go ahead and talk about the strategy that goes into the theme of this.
And this actually ties into one of the biggest rules mistake in Monopoly. So, once you start moving and you land on a space that might seem interesting, you can make 2 decisions. You can either buy it outright immediately, or you can allow it to go to auction so that you can buy it for cheaper.
The bank has brought it to market, you got first bid, but if you're not interested, they're going to sell it.
At the end of that round, someone will be the owner of that particular spot. So it is in your prerogative to try and take it.
Now, along with that, some of the strategy elements is going to be the math of how things are laid out, where your most valuable properties are in comparison to where most people will average when it comes to a dice roll. For instance, your orange and red over here on the corner.
Super valuable.
Kentucky, New York, Tennessee, those are going to be some of the most valuable pieces you can get. These heavier-ended ones?
Not at all.
Well,
likely never to land there.
They feel good if someone lands on them, but the odds down here are significantly reduced, particularly because of all of the blank spaces directly next to them.
Another really good space to usually focus on is the short line or all the railroad tracks. These are spread across the entirety of the board. It's actually one of the only pieces that has 4 spaces across, so there's more chances that you could potentially land there.
Yeah, and the reason you might be looking at the board layout here and thinking, why not go for green and yellow? The reason being is that the more chances someone has to roll the die as they're getting past the jail or as they're getting past the collect 200, the more times they've had to spend their money, move their money, potentially cycle past that section of the board. More people are going to end up in this location than anywhere else on the board other than your almost invaluable properties there at the beginning. So, when it comes to theme, does Monopoly do theme well?
Yes, definitely. It does achieve its goal of making everybody at the table feel horrible when one person is the complete and utter victor. Now, that is for sure.
Now, we can't leave this theme section without touching on a few games that dive into theme. Specifically, the thousands of copies that exist leaning into a different theme of the game. The core gameplay and the concepts will be the same. But the veneer is going to change. Here with the Deadpool, we're going to have a mix of flavor text. We're going to have the same humor and comedy that's introduced throughout Deadpool. And we're going to have different versions of locations that we can collect. These are going to be different versions of the Deadpool character himself. Now, part of me wants to say that these move away from the core theme.
Sure.
But part of the reason why people have picked up and played this game is because they touch on or introduce a whole new theme into the game. New meeples to play with, new styles of money, new locations to collect. You can tour Paris, you can go to China, you can see the 7 wonders of the world through a Monopoly game. And from a thematic stance, oftentimes the gameplay doesn't change to meet that theme adjustment. But sometimes it does. One of those situations where it does in spades is going to be Monopoly Gamer here. Monopoly Gamer is going to be a full thematic reskin of the game, along with core mechanic changes.
So it introduces power-ups, it introduces special player abilities, and it also introduces tokens that can go on the board that can affect other players. So there's a little bit more interaction than you would normally get in other versions of Monopoly. So it's pretty fascinating how it works. It even has a race feature, which is pretty nice.
It totally pulls in and brings the things that we love from Mario Kart into a game that seems like it would be a little hard to integrate those ideas, but the concept of moving around a track is open-ended enough that you can put any number of flavors and styles and customizations on top of it without necessarily breaking that core concept.
And they already have.
And they already have. Slide this back down. All that being said, if a game originally designed to teach you about the horrendous nature of capitalism and the idea of a landlord having a monopolist control over the community or properties that they own strikes your interest,
and you want to live vicariously through that character, this game might...
It might be right for you, but along with that, if a different flavor, a different style, a different theme, or even some different mechanics that dig into a core element or nature of this game, whether it's racing around a track, whether it's playing and utilizing money in various ways, whether it's even cheating, strikes your interest, there's probably going to be a version of Monopoly out there that is in fact right for you.
Oh yeah, for sure. You just have to look.
Yeah, but you'll have to do a little bit of Googling. Now, after that, let's go ahead and swing into the accessibility of this game. Where does Monopoly stand when it comes to getting it to the game table, talking and teaching the rules, and actually playing it as a core element?
Well, I think that's one of the most fascinating things about Monopoly. It's become almost a cultural staple up to this point. It's more of an engine for people to try and have fun with than an actual game at this point, which I find fascinating as well.
There have been so many different owners and variations of this game that the natural inclination is to create a mix of house rules, both Monopoly creating a mix of house rules, because some of these would be considered not traditional, but then also communities and fans creating their own versions of how to play, some of which dramatically break the game and make it less fun.
But I would argue that those house rules and that type of ownership that people take is because of the core, the structure of the game itself, and how simple it is to... and how simple it is to assimilate, right?
Yeah, there's a framework here that isn't hard to innovate on, isn't hard to play with, right? So let me go ahead and touch on one thing that I found really interesting when getting these 1935, 1936 versions of the game. Even back then, when the Parker Brothers was first introducing Monopoly to a wider fan base, they heard the complaints. The game's a little bit too long, too clunky, takes way too long to drive someone into complete bankruptcy. Please give us a quicker way to play. And the owners of Monopoly have been solving that problem and that question for a significant amount of time with Monopoly Mega, with Monopoly kind of the new updated version that even has a warning in it against the idea of playing with house rules, or Monopoly The Longest Game, which leans into
the joke.
It leans into those criticisms, right? From day one, from 1935, they've been talking about how to make it better to get to the table, more accessible, more fun to play, quicker, more easy to learn, and that's going to start with these short rules.
Yeah.
Now, the short rules are going to have some interesting variants.
It's three main things. First, at the beginning of the game, everyone gets 2 deed cards immediately.
Yeah, you're going to draft them right from the start, so the property is already reduced, both from how long it will take you to land on them all, but you'll also be able to generate and trade and upgrade earlier on.
Yep. The second thing is that instead of having 4 houses in order to build a hotel, you're only going to need 3 on each of those properties.
Yeah, lowers that barrier to entry just a little bit.
And then finally, the end game is triggered not when everyone is bankrupt, but when the second player is bankrupt. And at that point, everybody tallies up their score, and whoever is the richest player wins.
Yeah, absolutely. So even from day one, they were thinking about accessibility. Now, before we get into our own personal thoughts around accessibility, I'd love to talk about the ways that Monopoly has adjusted or leaned into the idea of accessibility. And I'd like to start here with Monopoly Junior. Monopoly Junior is honestly the same core game. It's a little cutesy, it's a little kid-friendly. The money isn't in piles of different variations of numbers. Instead, you have the same ones that you're handing out and trading. But some of the changes that Monopoly Junior has done. First off, you're moving around a smaller board, collecting smaller items, and one of the core elements that's going to reflect back on this short Monopoly game, once a single player has gone bankrupt, so has been taken out of the game state ends and everyone counts up their money to determine who's the winner. It means that everyone's playing all the time instead of the knockout mechanic that exists in main Monopoly. We've all seen games that started with 5 players, end with an hour and a half of 2, right? So Monopoly Junior is going to be the most accessible version of a Monopoly game, and it even leans into the fact that you're teaching kids around counting, you're teaching kids around ownership and property and trading and negotiating on a table, right? It might not be the best educational tool.
Yeah.
The gaming community will have to be the judge of that, but it certainly is one.
Yeah.
Right?
I think another one that deserves mention here is Monopoly Ultimate Banking. So Monopoly Ultimate Banking, and I find this really fascinating. In the original game, when talking about players, they made a very specific mention if a banker wanted to also be a player. So I think in the original game, they assumed that somebody would just count the money, spread out the money, make sure that everybody got everything right, but never actually participate in the game.
There's certainly a connotation between the idea of a banker as a playing unit and the banker as sort of the manager of the game state.
Yep. I think that's where the concept of cheating came from originally. So, in Monopoly Ultimate Banking, they did away 100% with the banking. Now what they have is what they call here the Ultimate Banking Unit. And with this, players are going to just use a credit card. And in that credit card, it's going to record a multiplicity of things. It's going to record what properties you own, it's going to record how much money you have, and it's going to record the stock market, because that's another new feature about this, as it fluctuates throughout the game. So it does away with an entire component and makes it just much more streamlined and easy.
Now, it adds a difference, a clunkiness in its own right?
Yeah.
Anytime you introduce electronics into the board game space, there is numbers you have to hit. There's a sequence you have to put in every time you want to do an update. But it's a different type of clunkiness. They each have their drawbacks and their positives, and so depending on how you like to interact with your board state, this might be one that solves an issue or a barrier for you when it comes to playing Monopoly.
Yeah, and you also get a really fancy credit card, plastic. I dig that.
Yeah. So, the last thing I want to lean into before we talk about our sense of the accessibility of this game is going to be them leaning into their own joke. Monopoly, the longest game ever.
Do you know you have this the other way?
Monopoly, the longest game ever.
Ooh.
This is going to be, for me, I think probably my favorite version of Monopoly.
Really?
Not because it's the best to play, but because it's them identifying and leaning into the humor of the game.
Just admitting that this is a way that people end up playing our game every time.
The fact that they're willing to make a joke about it and address that issue, that the same issue that they've been answering from day one, I think is refreshing and actually really funny.
Well, I think it's
love
reflected.
having this on the shelf.
Yeah, and I think it's reflected in the way that they've always handled the property the entirety of their ownership. They have always put the public, the people, the audience, to participate, to send their voices in. I think even by one of the editions called the Here and Now edition, they actually surveyed everybody that was willing to put in an answer and say what they wanted on their Monopoly board. So on the Here and Now edition, it's different places around the world that people actually decided they wanted to visit.
A fully customized design, and we don't have a copy of that. Some of them are kind of hard to get your hands on. This one was actually a little hard to get my hands on during the time. But this longest game ever edition leans into the concept of Monopoly being a little bit of a grueling game sometimes, being unaccessible, and this makes it as unaccessible as possible. I believe the longest game of traditional Monopoly, not this version of Monopoly, lasted something like 70 straight days of playing.
I'm assuming they put all the house rules in at
I don't
the same
think so.
time.
I think it was legitimately, because it is a world record owning thing, right?
Wow.
70 straight days of the traditional Monopoly. So there's an issue there that makes it inaccessible, and this leans into that. If you played this based off of the rules existing in here, you would never be able to finish.
Yeah.
It is impossible to go bankrupt. There's only one die, so you're never rolling doubles, you're never getting extra movement. There are 3 layers of tracks, which you're seeing B-roll of right now. Every time you own a property, you get all 3 of those properties. You have to develop them all at the same time. If you start running out of money, you can rip the bills in half to create more money for yourself, like taking out loans or just creating money in the game. And you only win when you own every single property on the board.
So I can definitely say this version of Monopoly is not right for me.
Well, but for me, because the joke itself, having Monopoly on the shelf, having people come over saying, oh, I love Monopoly, let's play. This is the funniest one to bring out and put on a table. All that being said, let's go ahead and talk about the accessibility when it comes to our view of the game. How accessible is genuine Monopoly? Not the variations, not the reduxes, but just this core game.
Well, I would say that there's a reason why it's so popular, right? Just the concept of, as soon as you hear Monopoly, you know immediately that you're trying to get a lot of things. You're trying to gain money.
Sure.
So there's an intuitive connection there as soon as even before you open the box. Following that just throwing these dice, there's very minimal rules overhead here.
That's the main mechanic of the game. Now, there's strategy to it, but I think there's enough you could sink your teeth into it. It's set collection in a way. It's a variation on mechanics that we've seen integrated into games that exist currently. Now, does it do it the best? I don't know. I think there's a lot of games nowadays that have taken the framework of what Monopoly does well and have reintroduced it or brought it into a thought or idea around game design that is actually way more fun to play than this game is. But the reason it's in every house is because it is very easy to set down on a table, let everyone know the overview of how they play. People know how to handle money. People know what property and mortgaging and buying means. They know how to deal with the bank. And they know how to roll a set of dice and move around the track. There's not a lot of rules overhead beyond that.
And I think one of the main reasons why this is such a staple is because it takes away the onus on the players of making decisions that might affect them later. Rolling these dice is completely out of your hand. Falling on spaces is completely out of your hands. At the end of the day, I think what people are really doing with Monopoly, what people are doing is that they're gathering around something that is familiar enough that everybody in their household can get their mind wrapped around and having an experience together, knowing that nobody is necessarily guilty of making everybody else feel bad or anything at all during the game.
Well, and genuinely, the thing that I think that should be noted when it comes to the accessibility of a Monopoly game is the fact that this game has been a catalyst to families coming together around the kitchen table, around the dinner table for generations. And that alone is something to be proud of. Whether or not we think today that it is a mind-blowing game when it comes to game design or innovation, it set the pace for this concept of gaming that we have right now.
Yep.
So if you haven't ever played it before, I'd say it's worth giving it a shot. And if you do love and own Monopoly, or maybe have it in your collection and haven't tabled it as often as you could, there's something here that makes it inviting, accessible, and refreshing in a really uncomfortable way for us that love deeper games. Along with that, there are so many different variations of Monopoly that there's a chance you could find one that actually fits into the idea of what you consider fun.
Yep.
Whatever variation that is, whether it's just spending time with your family, trying to cheat as efficiently as possible, having something that you think is one of the best jokes in board gaming space all around, or leaning into something a little bit more classic like Mario Kart, a more traditional video game centric thing, and pulling those kids off the TV screen and getting them to sit down in front of you.
Yeah.
There's a lot that makes this game aggressively accessible.
Yeah, and if all of that sounds up your alley, then this...
It might be right for you. It just might. I'm so sorry to say it, but it just might. Let's continue to the gameplay. And in this section of the video, we don't talk about how to play. We've already sort of been over that. Instead, I want to talk about the mechanics of core Monopoly that stand out to us as interesting, as fun, as intriguing, that might make this right or wrong for people watching this video. And let's open it up to all of these other titles as well. Any of these that stand out to you as, oh, that's something really cool that makes me consider tabling it.
Yeah, so from core Monopoly itself, I've always liked the idea of collecting areas, dominating certain parts of the board, and then building upon those areas with my houses or with my hotels. I feel that entire strategy or that process is very fulfilling to a certain point. Just being able to get to a hotel.
To own a place. It feels good to build up your location. And Monopoly Mega leans into that concept. Literally, you can build skyscrapers.
Yeah.
You can develop railroads. So that part that you think is fun, is something that Monopoly's identified and leaned into. So I find that intriguing. Now, for me, one of the elements that, and this might be a little thing, but an element of gameplay that I have always found intriguing is going to come back to these icons. I remember every time I played Monopoly as a kid, I wanted to be the thimble. I just did. I don't know why. It might be because my mom grew up sewing and knitting, and so like we literally have these around the house. But this little icon, for me, has enough attachment to it that I would probably get a tattoo of this symbol, right? It's where board gaming in some ways started. And I think that's true for a lot of people, whether it's the car, the top hat, whether it's some of the new icons that exist in the new version of Monopoly, or the little rubber duck from my first Monopoly game. These are things that people identify with, attach themselves to. And this, I think, is probably one of the first games that gave people that opportunity.
Interesting. So it's all about the tactile feeling of the experience.
100%. I am this thimble. I get to move it. I get to lift and place. The components are built well. They're nice. They're sturdy. And they fully represent the thing that you are, right? The type of person you're exploring this board with. Now, some of the other things that I find interesting when it comes to core Monopoly, and then we'll get into the periphery. The mindset or mechanics when it comes around income tax. Pay 10% or $200.
Well, that's actually changed in the modern versions. Now you only pay, I think it's $200 flat.
Well,
or $300.
I was reading the original rule book, and it said here that you can either decide to round up and pay $200, or if you think your 10% is going to be lower, then you add up the value of your money, your properties, your mortgages, like every little bit of value you have. Your house is everything. And then you can pay 10%, but you have to decide to do that before you start adding your value.
Yeah.
So if you land here, you have to think through and either hand the government a pile of cash or say, I think I can skirt this line just enough.
And that's exactly what got removed from the modern editions.
I think that's cool, though. I mean, it's okay if it's removed, but I did find that element fascinating. Now, when it comes to gameplay, there are going to be some elements that people have introduced themselves.
Yeah, for sure.
What are the, and this touches on gameplay and accessibility as well, but what are going to be the fan-made elements of this game, or the house rules of this game, that make it either more or less kind of interesting or fun to play?
Oh my god, there's so many different house rules, but we're only going to touch on kind of like the most popular, the top 5. So those 5 things are going to be taking a lap, free parking, not auctioning off property, not earning money while you're in jail, and then landing on go.
Okay, so those are going to be the 5 core house rules that people introduce into this game. And again, the newest version of Monopoly, the most updated classic version, suggests against using house rules if you want a clean and efficient game.
Yeah.
Let's start with taking a lap. What does that do here on the board?
So it seems like a lot of families started introducing this so that different players didn't feel alienated or completely without any opportunity of winning the game. So what you do is that at the beginning, no one can buy properties, and once you reach the go side, then you can start buying. So everybody has one full lap around the board.
For dice to do what dice do, I suppose?
Yeah,
and
maybe.
Determine who is the first player. Now, the way the original game solves this is the highest roller is going to go first. Dice are already determining the game from the very start. There's no reason to take a lap. And what this does is slows down the initial round of the game by an entire couple turns at least.
Yeah, you could potentially get some community chest cards and some chance cards, but you're gonna delay the game at least by 20, 30 minutes.
And you're not actually changing the math on who goes first and who gets access to those properties ahead of everyone else.
Yeah.
And what's the second house rule?
So the second house rule is free parking. So apparently this is the #1 most popular rule done across everywhere in America and in the world.
I grew up playing with free parking.
Oh, you did?
I thought it was a core rule, right? And I still, to this day, if I was gonna play Monopoly, would probably play with free parking.
It stretches out the game so much.
I know better now that I've made this video, but here's what free parking does. Every time money gets paid, right?
Either from taxes or luxury tax or even from mortgages,
it is going into the middle. And when it goes into the middle and you land on free parking, you're getting
jackpot,
a pile of cash. Now here's the crazy thing. My household, we'd start with $500 in the middle, no matter what.
Yep, I've heard that a lot of people. I think everybody puts $200 up front into that.
Yeah,
into
you
that
just
pool.
start with a pile, And so you get free parking, you're going to the lottery. Now,
man.
I understand why these things are introduced, right? It gives you a windfall, a moment of celebration, a chance to come back into the game, but Monopoly isn't about that.
It's about destroying everything around
It's
you.
not about keeping other people in the game. It's not about making sure everyone in the game state is having a good time. If you want to end the game and win the game and actually play the game and enjoy it in a way, the whole point is going bankrupt.
Yeah.
Which means 3 out of 4 people are not having a good time.
Nope.
So,
only one winner does.
So house rules are designed to keep the entertainment value up at the cost of the game itself.
Yeah, and I think that's a temporary measure because eventually everybody on the table is
Eventually,
going
you
to get just tired.
You have fun hanging out with your family, and then you all leave the game.
Sour, bitter, somebody flipping a board probably, not...
Something like that. Something like that. Now, what's the third house rule?
So, this is something that a lot of people get wrong. When you land on a space, you either buy it or you must auction it. People just leave it as is.
Yep.
That is not correct.
No, that space is being taken. What this does is it reduces the amount of overhead. I mean, the odds of landing on a space and then having someone circle back around and having to re-land on a space are really low.
No, it's insane.
Right? And so you need to maximize the fact that the dice gods put you on that location. Someone is taking it. Now, the interesting thing in the core original rules of Monopoly is when someone lands on a location, they could buy it at face value, $60 here for the Baltic Avenue. Or they could give it to the bank and begin the bidding process. But they can also bid on a space.
Oh, yeah, 100%.
So there's a chance I could say, no, I'm good. Let's open it up to auction. I'll pay $30 for Baltic Avenue.
Or you could just pay $1.
I'll pay $1 for Baltic Avenue. Whatever it takes. And if the group doesn't bid against you, you could even strike a little bit of a better deal on a property that might be more expensive. Or you could drive the price up and someone could screw you out of something you really need. That's the dance. That's the balance. But there's some strategy there that I find intriguing. The idea of landing on Boardwalk, looking around the table and seeing that people don't have as much money as maybe they'd like and saying, no, I'm good. I'm not going to buy it, but I would pay $150 for it.
Oh, you don't have $150?
Well, I guess
Oops.
I get it. I find that intriguing. I really do. What's the other house rules that we want to talk about?
So the other house rule that we'll talk about is supposedly not being able to make any money while you're in jail.
If you're in jail, you can't collect money, can you?
Incorrect. Yes, you can.
Okay.
You can definitely collect rent while in jail. The only thing the jail is preventing you from doing is advancing on the board.
Now, this is a little bit of a fun additional punishment that people like to do to their friends. Like, no, you're in jail. I'm not going to pay you anything, right? But taxes and rent and mortgages still have to come in whether or not someone got locked up.
Yeah.
And this game reflects that. Now,
Well,
again,
you can even enter auctions too.
all of these mechanics are designed around extending the game state for everyone, which isn't the point of this game.
Yeah, it's supposed to be a normal game, guys.
90 minutes long, 60 to 90
Yeah,
minutes.
it's not supposed to be an entire day affair.
And what's the last house rule we want to touch on here?
Landing on go. So a lot of people...
You get $400, right?
Yes, no, actually, you don't. You
But-
just get $200.
But we always got $400.
Correct, that is a house rule.
But if I land on go, I'm extra special.
No, not really.
Now, again, this is a windfall, right? It's a chance to be excited over the course of a game that doesn't give you as many opportunities to be excited as it does to be strategic.
Yeah.
And so this just adds more money into the pockets of people, extends the game state, just lengthens the whole journey to a point where people probably won't get knocked out and probably won't have quite as much fun.
Remember, everyone, the entire point of Monopoly is to go bankrupt, to make everybody else go bankrupt.
So the last part of this gameplay section, we've talked about some of the things that strike us when it comes to the core Monopoly game and some of the elements that people introduce themselves.
Yeah.
Out of these that we have up here in the lineup, are there any mechanics or ideas or concepts that they introduce that you find striking or intriguing?
Well, I think definitely Mario Kart, the Mario Kart edition brings some interesting elements. Like, you don't have to worry about necessarily owning properties. Now you're trying to get certain bonuses and you're trying to leave different types of traps around the board, trying to kind of build up your own character in order to succeed
Well, and
faster
there's
than anybody
even
else.
some asymmetric player powers in that, right? Like every character has some variation in how they play. I find that really interesting in a game that usually has relatable but static and generic meeple pieces, right? Everyone's the same functionally, just stylistically they're different.
Yeah.
Now, the one that I think strikes me as the most intriguing when it comes to integrating different types or styles of gameplay,
I think this would be my favorite.
is going to be the Cheaters Edition, where you're doing everything you can to cheat.
Oh yeah, you're open to stealing money directly from the bank. You're open to taking property cards away. I saw you taking it. You're caught. You have to pay $100 to everybody around the table if you get caught.
Okay.
And you're just supposed to genuinely cheat as much as you can.
And I believe there's a handcuff you add to your wrist that is actually attached to the game board itself.
It's attached to the board, yes. It's just awesome to me.
Yeah. So, Monopoly Cheaters Edition leans into the idea of breaking the game in a way very similar in concept to the longest game ever. This is one that genuinely will remain in my collection because I find the joke fun and funny, but realistically, I find the gameplay of this really intriguing.
Oh yeah, I would steal so much money. So much money.
The last thing that I really want to touch on when it comes to gameplay differences is going to be Monopoly Mega here. Monopoly Mega is going to introduce a mechanic that was actually voted on by the kind of community base. Another version of them bringing in fan ideas into a core game. The Play Faster Speed Die. Now what this does is it adds the opportunity for immediate resolves or actions. So instead of having the gamble of rolling doubles, which I think you're going to talk about here in just a second, it introduces a way for you to get an extra move, grab additional cards, have a free adjustable kind of bus move throughout the course of the game, and actually decreases the playtime to that 60 to 90 minute window that we said it really should be played in.
Oh yeah.
So this leans into that. Now, along with that, it introduces a few extra properties, has higher values of money for a little bit more trading, and introduces skyscrapers into the core of the game. So it does a mix of interesting things, but that speed die is going to be maybe the most innovative mechanic when it comes to the gameplay or changes on core Monopoly. So if all of those elements of gameplay stand out to you, whether you play with house rules, if you do, let us know which house rules you play with, and if any of us have changed your mind when it comes to playing with them in the future. But if all of those elements of gameplay stand out, if you want a game that was innovative and refreshing and open enough for people to introduce their own mix of ideas and concepts, or some of these other versions of Monopoly seem like things that might be more fun,
yeah, then this might be right for you.
It still might be. After that, let's go ahead and move down to the modes of play. How many people can this play to, and where does it honestly play best?
Well, from my understanding, you can usually play most Monopoly versions up to 8 players.
Well, yeah, and
right?
it's going to be based on the amount of chits we have. So the original Monopoly here, we have 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7 unique pieces. Could have been some things lost there. In this other version, I have 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7 as well. And then on the board here, we have a collection of
5 pieces. Yeah, so it varies from the different versions.
I think
of
it
Monopoly.
varies on the different versions. I think Monopoly Junior is
think
going to
it's
be
4.
a 4-player game. Monopoly Mega is going to have accessibility all the way up to 8. And then over there with Monopoly Gamer,
It's going to be 4 as well.
it's going to be 4. And then finally, let's check one of the themed ones. Monopoly Deadpool is going to have the options for 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6 total players.
Interesting.
So there's certainly a mix. I mean, it doesn't restrict itself in the style of scale. It'd be more in the mechanics of the gameplay. And where does it shine? Like, how many people do you want sitting down at the table if you're trying to have the best experience with this game?
I think if you're going to play Monopoly, you should probably always play either with 3 or with 4 players because it gives the most space for interaction, auctioning, bidding, negotiations around, and you're not necessarily just negotiating with a single person at that table.
I would lean away from 3 if I was going to say preferred. I'd be a little bit higher on that count. I'd be 4 or 5. The reason being is that a few people will get knocked out of the game early. That's sort of the hope. But it's supposed to be a sit around the table, have fun, kind of give each other crap, and be with your family or friends for a time period. This isn't as interesting. It's the conversations you're having. It's the dynamic around the table. You can have that at 3. But there's not as much trading. There's not as much negotiation. I think 4 is going to be, honestly, my sweet spot for Monopoly.
Yeah.
And I think it identifies that. The fact that the scale and variation can increase, but never goes down to 1, and never really goes under 4, right? That's really the area that people are kind of leaning into.
Yeah, I guess the only reason why I would play with 3 is if I wanted a shorter game, but also trying to maximize the interaction as most as possible.
I certainly wouldn't do this as a 2-player game. It will take you way too long to get to every single property on the board. Really, when I think of turns for Monopoly, when it comes to the modes of play, I think of each round as more of a game state than a dice roll, right? A dice roll is quick.
Yeah.
And it's interesting, but not as exciting. It's not about keeping you necessarily engaged with every single dice roll. Instead, I want to see 4 or 5 people cover the board and cover and pepper locations. Because this game actually does something that's really important to game design nowadays. When you're taking your turn, I'm interested in it. That's something that a lot of games overlook, even right now with current design standards. I want you to roll to land on my property. If you're coming up close, I'm excited for your move. So when other people are playing, I'm still engaged with the game as a core. That's fascinating to me. And something that, like I said, a lot of people still overlook when it comes to good game design.
Yeah, especially even with the heaviest games in the market today, there's almost no play interaction or interest in other players' turns. You're just playing a board game by yourself.
100%. And so I think about it more as a round being around the board than a round being a cycle of dice rolls. And so I want people to cover and populate this to the point that we're nearly finished with the game by the time we've done a full rotation 5 or 6 times. I mean, I don't want to be sitting here and rolling and rolling and rolling because then people aren't running into me. They're not catching up with my properties. They're not paying me their rent. They're not going bankrupt. And at the end of the day, I want everyone to go bankrupt. So that's going to be kind of my take on it, right? A 4-player game and why it strikes me as maybe the sweet spot for this title. Now, out of the 1,000+ game designs that have been created.
Yeah, there's definitely some spice in there and some variation. So if you're looking for something that goes a little bit beyond the traditional Monopoly, you're going to have your options. It's all a matter of, as we've said before, to look for them and read up.
And I think there's versions that play better and worse at higher and lower player counts. If I had to be honest, I would bring Cheaters Edition in with a higher amount of people, more distraction, more opportunity to slip a coin or a dollar into your pocket, and more chances to be caught.
Yeah.
Ultimate Banking might be better with a smaller amount of people, right? A 3-player family game, because you don't have to do all the accounting and math. You're just focused on the board state. Or moving over here to Monopoly Junior, right? 2 players may be fine there.
Yep.
If we're going to be honest, 2 kids sitting around rolling some dice, having some fun with numbers, that's sort of what the game's designed to do.
So if all of this sounds up your alley,
there's probably a version of Monopoly that is in fact
right for you.
Ooh, that's a spicy thing to say, isn't it? Interesting. When you watch this video, you didn't expect me to get there, did you? Let's continue with this.
There's a version for every single person in the world, I'm sure.
People don't like to admit it, but I genuinely think there probably is.
Oh God, okay. So what are we touching on
Jan
next?
didn't even expect us to get here in this video.
I don't know where we are right now on.
The last thing we have to touch on is going to be innovation as a game state. This is a hard thing to judge, and one thing that we would love to have you, the audience, be way more involved in the conversation down below. I want to hear first, if you made it to this point in the video. If you have you subscribed? If you haven't, why?
What are you doing?
Like, seriously? Whatever the case. Innovation. Let's talk about how we as a channel are innovating on the way that we cover board game media across the board. I mean, high quality footage, good quality B-roll, a mix of games being brought to you, a thorough hour-long discussion on Monopoly. You haven't subscribed yet? I mean,
unheard of.
I mean, genuinely, hit that subscribe button.
Like, there's more to come, people.
All right, now that we've legitimately had, 20% of the audience have stopped watching.
Oh, they X'd out a long time ago, Jesse. You're fine.
Seriously, though, I would love to have a conversation with the audience down below about areas where you know that Monopoly was innovative and other games that are inspired by the framework that this set. But there's a few elements that I think I want to touch on around innovation as a whole, a lot of which we've talked about or,
alluded
to over the course of this video. Are there any of these that stand out to you initially?
I think, for me personally, is that Monopoly, even the original Landlord's game, its conception behind becoming a learning tool for children or for people in general through the lens of a game, I think is fascinating and excellent asset. And thankfully, because of that, I feel that more companies and more individuals have taken that type of leadership and have taken that type of responsibility to create things that inspire as well. And I think that's just great.
I mean, back in the day, people used a lot of different items for potential educational tools, right? The US currency itself had a art print run that was designed around showing people images and figures and historical events that they'd never see, you know,
in school.
That like, you didn't have the textbooks, you didn't have the access. The invention and design of the internet has changed the way we view things in a lot of ways. I mean, this genuinely allowed you to hear about places like Vermont Avenue or the Mediterranean Avenue and be there, experience them, ask questions about them, want to visit them, right? Where is Boardwalk? If it exists, maybe I want to go there. If it's so
Atlantic
high value,
City, New Jersey,
maybe I want to kind of spend time, right? Like, that's the interesting thing. And I think you're right on the money there, that setting the groundwork for something that was supposed to be fun and educational, knowledge through the lens of gameplay, we've certainly seen that, you know, reiterated throughout game design, both digital and physical.
Yeah, it's been echoed throughout the decades.
Now, some of the things that I touched on that I want to bring up as innovative. First off, these are cool.
Yeah, the people,
player
the
pieces, things that you attach to yourself. I genuinely think that this was one of the first games that allowed you to identify with something in this way, and still for me strikes an interesting chord. Like I said, I'm a thimble guy from this day on.
Do you think this was the advent of minis?
I'm not sure. I mean, it certainly could have been the advent of miniature gaming.
Outside of wargaming, you know, into more popular.
I'm curious
popular
where
games,
I'm curious
maybe.
where
I
it
don't
sets
know.
the stage. The other thing that I want to touch on that I talked about just recently, the fact that you stay connected to the game state throughout the course of the gameplay itself, I'm interested and intrigued by what every other player around the board is doing. That's something that's missed in so many games right now. And Monopoly got it right.
Well, and one of the fascinating things about that is that it's not even necessarily... I think it's more of a consequence of how the game runs, because you don't want people to be cheating on your turn, and you want to be making that money always.
I think you're right, but I think it is something that is so easily overlooked when it comes to game design as a whole. So I find that really intriguing. The other thing that I just have to acknowledge is innovative from the start. The fact that we're sitting with 8, 9, 10 versions on the table, thousands throughout the marketplace, they have done the best when it comes to branding, sales. They have a monopoly on the game state and the game industry from ground zero.
They have a monopoly on monopoly, is what you're trying to say.
The interesting thing is that was not done lightly or easily. The amount of knowledge and time and investment that went into getting this game into people's households, the fact that we both grew up playing it and most of the people around the nation grew up knowing and experiencing this game, is innovative. This is where people's relationship with board gaming starts.
Regardless of who you are, honestly. Who didn't start with Monopoly?
I think even today, I mean, unless you have parents that love board gaming, and that's a small subsection of the audience base, you're gonna start with chess, checkers, Monopoly. You know, those are the ones that they pull out to try to teach you about math, to try to teach you about numbers. And I think that's one of the reasons so many people owned it, seeing it as not just a plaything, not just a toy to be thrown around, but a opportunity to bring the family together, but then also an opportunity to teach important life lessons across the course of experience. I find that striking and certainly innovative.
No, for sure. Yeah, and I think another thing that's really interesting about this particular system is how malleable it actually is. How easily you can manipulate certain elements and still keep it genuine to what it was supposed to be in the first place, right?
It's simple and complex in a fascinating way, right? It's a dice roll and a racetrack. That's the structure.
But it can be made into anything else.
There's thought there, there's opportunity for game design and innovation, and people love to hate this game. They really genuinely do, and I think it's because we all grew up with it.
Yeah.
And if you're watching to this point, I'm willing to admit, this is not my first pick to table. This is not my first pick to own. This is not a game that I would sell someone outside of the idea that it has a historical connotation and is worth experiencing for a nostalgic element.
And to be honest, if this is your gateway into the hobby, then welcome. We are
100%.
We're happy for you to be here. We're happy that you're curious for more things. Another game you might consider is maybe even Ticket to Ride.
Yeah, absolutely. I mean, we're excited to have you in this space, have you exploring the board game space as a whole. Hopefully you've enjoyed this video and been intrigued by the conversation, maybe an in-depth conversation of a game that you didn't know had so much to talk about.
Yeah.
Here's the cool thing. This space has been redefined by the advent of video games, the advent of the internet, and the opportunity for game design to go beyond the barriers of a household, right? And so Monopoly has its place in history. Even, I would argue, has its place on my shelf. I'm personally not getting rid of the 1935 edition, and I'm not getting rid of the Longest Game or the Cheaters edition. Those are staying. They're part of my core collection. I'm willing to admit that. But there are other games that are worth exploring. And our channel is designed around covering some heavier things, but also covering things that may be games that you really want to bring home to your family. And we just want to reiterate that.
Yeah, for sure.
So, at the end of this discussion, the last thing we want to hit on, price point.
So actually, this goes completely against what the game shows, but this is one of the most economical games you could ever get on your table. You
could buy a copy for $14.
Or for $1 at your local thrift store.
You could buy a copy for $1 at your local thrift store. You could spend, I don't know, this was only like $50 or so to get a classic historical version of the game. I mean, there are rarer versions that are significantly more expensive. So there's a lot of different ways to get your hands on this game in any variation or style. Now, some of the more exclusive, hard-to-get ones might be themed more up your alley, but when it comes to core game, when it comes to the mechanics, and when it comes to the variations on mechanics, they've done really well at making sure these are all very accessible.
Oh, super affordable, really easy to get. Amazon, your local FLGS, Walmart, Target, it's absolutely everywhere.
So,
if all these things sound great to you, if Monopoly sounds like a game that you think your family might enjoy, that your brother might enjoy, that your parents might enjoy, then, hey, maybe this is something that could...
It really could be right for you, which is a fascinating and dangerous thing to say in the board game space.
Oh, yeah.
Because now that we're at the very end of the video, people have stayed tuned for the majority of
surprisingly so, yeah.
If this is your first introduction to board gaming as a whole, we're excited to have you here. We want to celebrate that journey, the place that we both started. But if you really want the behind-the-scenes loop, there are things that make this game not as fun as others that exist today.
Maybe a tad antiquated.
There's some game design principles, rolling to move, that make it a little rough to table and might not make it as interesting for your friends and family to play.
The concept of knocking players out while other players are still enjoying the game.
Some of the games last well beyond the time where you've lost. So, very quickly, Jan, because I know you've been stirring in your loins, what are some of those elements that really frustrate you about Monopoly?
Yeah, so...
Without ragging on it.
Well, of course not. That's never the point. So the way that I'm going to approach this is the following. If you are here because you love Monopoly, then that is awesome. Welcome. If this is your game, then more power to you.
We want to celebrate that, and genuinely, I would sit down and play this with you.
Yeah, so I feel this comes down more, at the end of the day, honestly, this comes down more to taste.
Yep.
If what you're trying to do is get more what I would describe as a beer and pretzels games where you're rolling dice, trying to collect things, trying to make money, and just talking with your family, talking with your friends, just having fun, then hey, maybe Monopoly is that game for you. But if you're looking for maybe some other things.
One core element. If you've watched this whole video trying to determine if Monopoly is right or wrong for you, there is a degree to which we want to make sure we let you know the problems that exist. And if you made it to this point, maybe you want to know some of those things. So that you can decide if this is the one you want to sit down with, or if a variation, or a different style of game that we also cover here on the channel.
Yeah. So with that being said, Monopoly is known in the board game world as the don't ever do that game. Okay? Most games start off by saying that we are completely off Monopoly. Monopoly is ancient. Nobody follows what Monopoly does anymore. And if any game touches on roll to move. If any game touches on bankruptcy or player elimination, they immediately get, in a derogatory term, compared to Monopoly. And a lot of diehard or just general gamers in this space are going to see this video, and they're immediately going to get angry that we're even covering Monopoly.
You know,
But
I think you're right. Like, there's going to be people frustrated with the idea of us covering Monopoly, and there's also going to be frustration, and there's also going to be frustration with the concept of our video as a right for you, wrong for you series is to establish that a game doesn't have to be right for everyone.
correct.
Doesn't have to be wrong for everyone, and to highlight the elements that make it exist in both those spheres. But you're right.
Yeah.
There's frustration around this game. And I think part of it is because when I tell people I play board games for a living, they say
Monopoly?
and I say, no, not quite. Actually, the entire game design process has changed a lot with the advent of video game technology. There's been a lot of cross communication. Basically, anything you can do in a digital space.
You don't actually say that.
No, I genuinely do.
Oh my god.
You
Poor
can
people.
do in a tabletop space now. I mean, comparing it to the video game world is a actual reference point.
Yeah.
Monopoly is no longer what this industry is.
Yeah, this is essentially a floppy disk.
But it is the grandfather.
It is the grandfather. And so here's the thing. The reason why you're going to hear so many gamers out there get angry when they
Cannot
hear...
wait for the comments.
Oh my god. When they hear that your game has been Monopoly is because they're so excited about all the other games that they know are gateway games, things that they can welcome you with, that they feel that they will 100% hook you with. And that is, it's mostly a thing about passion. It's mostly about,
They want you
introducing.
to play a game with them that they enjoy, that you enjoy, and that brings you back for another experience. I think, at the end of the day, despite the fact that it has roll and move, despite the fact that it has player elimination, despite the fact that the original copy of the game was introducing and trying to solve a core gameplay problem, they included a highlight saying, we are giving you rules for a short game because it wasn't working. Right?
And we're still publishing it the exact same way.
Exact same, but this is how maybe you should play it if you want to have more fun. The biggest problem with Monopoly, and I said this throughout the video, I said it in a different tone, a different style, but I still made sure people were aware, this is a game about one person having fun.
Yep.
It really is, and as gamers, we want the table to have fun.
Yeah, that is
because we want you to
normal.
walk out of the house thinking, I'm going to go buy a copy of the game, or I want to play it again, or I want another game night. Monopoly, if you're playing with 4 people, 3 of them are having a bad time because they're going bankrupt. That's the point. If you can celebrate that and have fun with that, awesome. Yeah, but you have to go into it without knowledge. Instead of house rules that design the game around extending it, dragging it on, making it more lengthy and more cumbersome, play the game as it was meant to be played. Play core rules, or play the rules of the version you own and dig into it, and make fun of and pick on and celebrate driving your friends into immaculate debt.
Yeah, so
But
there's...
that's the point.
Yeah. And there's 2 more messages that I want to convey here.
Okay.
First message. If you ever discover that someone's first game is Monopoly, don't alienate them.
No.
Don't bring them down.
We
celebrate
celebrated
it.
that. Yeah,
yes,
100%.
celebrate. I'm so glad you played a board game, and this is why you should play all these others.
I grew up playing Monopoly.
Yes, and now you're here, you have a board game channel, and you
Yeah.
play Root,
Yeah.
and all these other crazy games,
Sure.
right?
No, I think there's going to be people that don't make it to this point in the video because they get so angry
Oh, of course.
at the very front, saying, how could you talk about this? Why are you being moderately positive?
Why are you dedicating so much time on Monopoly?
And it's because it sold 250 million copies
And
in
it's still
35
selling.
in 35 different languages, and it's still selling for a reason.
It's everyone's favorite, or at least most well-known board game ever.
There's nostalgia there, but there's also history there. And the fact that people are familiar with it and willing to table it means that it shouldn't be something that we stigmatize or judge people on. Instead, when they bring Monopoly to the table as a brand new gamer, I mean, I've had friends that the only thing they know is Monopoly. So when I say, hey, let's sit down and have a game night, they're like, oh yeah, I love Monopoly. They don't necessarily love the game. They love the idea of being at a table with people. And if you sold them on that idea, the idea of being friends and being family and gathering around for some good, tactile gameplay, why would you try to stigmatize them for that?
And the second message, and this actually goes out to all the people that have played Monopoly, if you have the slightest, the slightest curiosity about, wait, they're talking about all these games.
Let's list some. Let's go for it.
So,
Google these names.
Ticket to Ride is a wonderful gateway game. You have Ticket to Ride, Small World, Wingspan,
Azul.
There's, oh my god, there's
Kingdom Death Monster.
No. Don't Google that one.
Madara, Gloomhaven.
No. Shush.
Seventh Continent. You have Scythe.
What I'm trying to say.
Games.
What I'm trying to say is that everybody in this hobby, when you talk to them, what they are going to exude is passion in what they do, because once you get into this, it is so fun and such a different way of interacting with people you love or maybe people you've never met.
Now, I feel like we've went over this point multiple times.
Yes.
So we're gonna pause it here. We're gonna wrap up the video. But, I mean, at the end of the day, we wanted to do a little bit of a different thing with this video.
Yep.
First off, happy April Fools.
No, why would you say it?
Well, because they're an hour and a half into a video now.
Yeah, I think they deserve this at this point.
So, genuinely, but we wanted, the joke was
that we're covering Monopoly.
Honestly covering Monopoly. In a way and a perspective that I see a lot of channels that do top 5 things you get wrong when you play Monopoly, or how to play Monopoly Classic Edition, right? This is a mass market game that core gamers typically steer away from. We don't touch. And part of the joke, part of the humor in it is covering it through the lens of someone that has a wider experience and breadth of game knowledge now.
And that respects it.
And
for
trying
what it
to
is.
do something that actually respects where it stands.
Yeah.
So happy April Fools.
We hope you liked it.
We hope you've enjoyed the chaos and conundrum of today. And if you're watching this past April Fools, everything we've said up to this point has been 100% genuine.
Yeah.
The joke was
that we're covering it genuinely, seriously, honestly, right?
Yeah. Because our space, our industry, finds that a little weird.
Oh yeah, there's gonna. Oh my god, I can't wait. Just like you said about those comments.
I'm excited.
Oh my god.
I'm excited. Whatever the case, thank you so much for watching.
You're incredible.
Yeah.
It's amazing you're even here. And I just want to say this one final right for you, wrong for you. If what we've talked about during the entirety of this video has kept you hooked, then maybe there's a slight chance
you are wasting so much time. You should unsubscribe.
Then Quackalope
you should unsubscribe right now.
Right for you.
Yeah.
And you should totally hit that subscribe
Definitely
button.
not.
And maybe even stop on the Patreon. I don't know. Just maybe.
Whatever
Just
the
an
case. Whatever you do.
Remember to do the important thing.
Get out and play some games.
We'll see you guys next time.
Thank you.